mission plan. Is there any other proof that this might be happening? Well, here's one of the Air Force pictures that was taken after the Compton plane returned. Compton looks pretty pissed as far as I'm concerned. And Thompson looks puzzled and tired and what the hell is going on? What just happened? Neither one of them was looking at N. And Ed's kind of go, why are you guys mad? We just survived. You know, I mean, he doesn't seem to understand what's just happened. Notice he has his Mae West on. Now he's got his Mae West, so this picture was taken later. Brereton's happy as punch. Ent's pleased with himself. Compton still looks pissed. And he still won't look at Ent. So I think that's pretty, Compton, something had happened. And that's the end of it. Do you have any questions? No questions? Oh.
Did they drop the bombs yet?
Yes, they all dropped. Did the 376 drop their bombs? Yes, they did. Yes.
What was the outcome? How much is the ballistic cruise?
They did a significant amount of damage. What was underestimated by the Allies was how fast the Germans could bring the plant back on the line. Now, every attack, they would come down, but it would come back up, but it would never come back to its original level. But the Germans were able to bring Ploesti back pretty fast, and that includes the 1944 raids too. You had a question?
Yeah. From some of my reading about Operation Tidal Wave, apparently my understanding is that the two cities that I can't remember, Targovistic
Yes.
and the Floresti
Yes.
had very similar geographies.
Yeah,
So maybe they got confused, they thought they were there and they weren't quite there yet, and a turn was made too soon.
The question on the table was that Targovista and Floresti supposedly looked alike, so that as the planes were approaching the first waypoint, somebody could have mis-ID'd it for the actual IP and then turned. I would buy that as an argument, if there weren't these reports, that there was an argument in the cockpit. Which would have said that Wicklund, at the very least, said, no, sorry, this is not. And I would have hoped or would have thought that in the brief before the mission, somebody would have said, by the way, be aware, these two towns look alike. But I wasn't there. All the people are dead, so you really can't ask them. So it's somewhat supposition on my, but I've heard the same story that they did look alike. Anybody else? Okay, our next speaker is Nanc McLaughlin.
Is it dark up there? It looks like is there a light?
It is now.
No, I don't want
Oh, you want to know what?
There was a light up above here. Okay, I bring with me a stopwatch so I don't run over. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to start that right now, and you'll have to let me know if you cannot hear. Is everyone capable of hearing me? All right, great. I am Nanc McLaughlin Marshall, and I have to include my husband Marshall because he's helped me so far and so much, and we've spent so much money on doing research. My uncle is, or was, Tim McLaughlin, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. He was on the Wango, and he was a waist gunner on the Wango. The day that my grandparents received the telegram that Tim was missing in action is the day that I was born, just a few blocks from them receiving that telegram. So I've always been connected to it. My mom, she saved every document she could find. I have inherited over 500 documents, mostly letters from my Uncle Tim to my mother, to my father, and to his mother, which would be my grandmother. He will describe the same event to these three different people, but they will all turn out differently. He will not tell his mother, of course, anything that would bother her. So I can see an event through 3 different views, if you wish. Now, I'd like to first tell you, I'll skip around probably a little bit, and I would like to get into even some of the crew members. Flavel was the captain, or the pilot rather, and so I'd like to get into speaking about some of them, but right now I will tell you that Tim was 6th of 8 children, and they are separated in age by 24 years. So he happens to fall right in the middle. His oldest brother is 12 years older than he is, and his younger brother is 12 years younger. I have to include my mother as his sister, basically, because she has been dating my father for 8 years at that time. The kids in his family are very well educated. As a matter of fact, the first 4 children, 3 are college educated. And that's pretty good for those days if you know the low literacy rate that was in our country at that time. The boys are all mechanical. My grandfather was operating a truck farm at the time when the boys, and there are 4 boys, by the way, that will serve from this family. I am from a military family, and my father served in 5 major battles in World War II, including the Battle of the Bulge and Normandy, and he returned. So it helps me. And the older brothers, the oldest, Ted, was a Navy pilot himself. He was also a training instructor. All the children are musical, both chorally or orally, if you will, and instrumentally. My grandmother was in the church, so a church is part of the family. As a matter of fact, my mother would receive Tim's Bible, which I still have, the family Bible. All of the boys are hunters. They lived in, by the way, I don't think I told you, from Janesville, Wisconsin, and in Madison. They were farming north of Madison and then moved to Janesville. Now, Janesville happens to be a center. When the war starts, it changes very greatly because Rockford, Chicago, Madison, the naval air stations, you have military all over. And unfortunately, Tim's younger sister, she's only like 13, 14, and she is boy crazy. She is who they call the wild one, and Tim tries to keep her in line. So that makes a big difference too in this. As Ed said, the Wango Wango, the crew was very, very seasoned. They were already had received distinguished flying crosses. My uncle would talk about being interviewed by Yank for Yank magazine. I do not know if that ever was published, and that was about a low-level raid that they had previously gone on before this particular mission. I did do some research with 2 different military authors have helped me. One is Schultz, who did, he's got a separate book just on this mission alone, Donald Schultz, and Greg Jones, who is very well awarded, I should say, supremely highly awarded for his journalism efforts in military. And then, again, to just try to pick up what it was like from a B-24 standpoint, and I must add this. My uncle Tim was, he actually was trained on a B-17, and I don't think he ever, and actually went to the factory too. They did some training at the factory, so I don't think he ever was completely, he completely adapted to the B-24 from all of what I have read from the letters. on the B-24 that we went up with, our pilot was Charlie Lynch, and he corresponds with me frequently so that if I have questions about any of these things, he helps with that. As I said, I think, Tim was the youngest of 4 brothers that were serving. He's the only one that enlists, and he does so right after Pearl Harbor. I would like to say that my grandmother was always thinking that as long as he was here in this country, he was safe. Well, that's not really true when you get into flight school. Greg Jones, I caught an interview of his by doing some research through the Library of Congress. And there were, and I have to make sure I have this exactly right, 15,000 deaths in training alone. So he would try to gloss over, but there was one instance when he was scheduled to go out on a flight, and his crew, I don't know for what reason, but they didn't take that. They were rescheduled. It could have been, you know, some problem with the B-24, and it happened to be the only plane they had. That's all for all of these that were training. So what happens is he's rescheduled, so the next crew goes, and it catches fire during fueling, and 2 of the cadets are lost. They're trapped. He talks to my father about a number of accidents that are quite gruesome, actually. So these are things that he deals with, and at first it's a great thing. He's a young kid, and oh, it's fun. Get me up, and it's higher level, of course, with when they're flying, and then it changes. So let me check here on my time. Okay. It was difficult getting the planes, as I said, and also another factor that I don't think parents were aware of is that there were lots of deaths in training due to flu, pneumonia. You know, they're in compact barracks. It's cold. Some of these places aren't set up exactly the way you would like them to be. The crews change a lot, and that is because the training is intense, because there are AWOL issues. Some of them just can't make the type. They haven't had the schooling, the high school that they need for, say, algebra and some of these other things that they need to get through training. And you remember too that a lot of these kids had gone through the Depression, so that, you know, that plays into it too. One of the things I'd like to just give you now before I wind down is the 3 final letters, and just to let you know, I told you that you get a different view depending on who who he's writing to. In the final letter, and by the way, the co-pilot was the one that had to do, you know, they had to be checked over before they were sent out, so they wouldn't get information out to the enemy. And so anyway, that was Ryan, the co-pilot, that I have his initials on these letters. I have his name, actually. And when I think of Flavel, I really, it bothers me to know that he had a son, a 4-month-old son that he never saw. The bombardier Lanning, his mom lived not far from where my grandmother lived, and that was their only child. And they eventually had to move. They just could not live with the memories. What happened with the parents when they don't have a body to, you know, it never came back. There were no remains ever found. So this was very tragic, and it's hard for moms to deal with, in particular. And so that's why we also, Ron and I, purchased a brick for my dad and for Tim, and they rest side by side now in the Veterans Memorial Park in the Villages, Florida, where we live. Malachek, the tail gunner, was had just made up with his girl, and they were going to be married. And the radio man, Willis, he's the short one in the photos that we have. He was